everyone, Amer back with another Mission Impossible episode review as we just keep chugging along. Now we're talking about the Revival series, Season 1, Episode 13, which is called The Fixer. So this one starts out in a Washington, D.C. penthouse where a journalist named Arthur Six is talking to Judge Vosberg about declaring a mistrial in a high-profile case. Or else, Six will make the judge's psychiatric record public. The judge angrily pulls out a gun and threatens to kill Six, but Arthur remains calm, saying that his death won't fix the judge's problem, and Six's assistant Doyle looms in the background with his weapon trained on the judge. A shot is heard, and we learn that the judge turned the gun on himself. Jim gets his disc player from a newspaper vendor by asking for an obscure issue. The mission, Arthur Six has extensive blackmail information on all sorts of important officials, and the IMF must eliminate his files and get evidence to help his adversary, Senator Tom Oxenford, get him indicted during an upcoming committee vote. We get an apartment scene where we learn that the IMF has stepped into several key roles in Six's apartment building, allowing them access to wherever they need to go. Shannon opens a flower shop in the lobby, while Max becomes a security guard and Grant a repairman who gets into the building's control room and taps into various systems so that the IMF can watch Six's apartment, from where he plans to broadcast one of his upcoming shows, which will include a special event called the Patriots Ball. Jim calls Six, saying he's a friend of Senator Oxenford named Darren Wendell, and needs some help that the senator can't provide at this time. Six gets Doyle to check the story out and tells Jim to meet him at the Lincoln Memorial. The IMF intercepts Doyle's call and sends him information indicating that Mr. Wendell killed 3 people while driving drunk. At the memorial, Six tells him that he knows what's going on, and he'll only help him if he provides him with something he can use to put serious pressure on Oxenford. When Six leaves the apartment, Max and Grant head up with Shannon as part of the crew preparing for Six's TV show, and Shannon catches Doyle's eye, earning her an invite to the Patriots Ball. Grant puts up a huge flag as cover while he takes the opportunity to use a device which scrambles the control to Doyle's safe but finds it empty. He prepares to plant an envelope in it, but gets hurled backward by an electrical shock. Six returns to find out what's happened and demands answers from Grant despite Max and Shannon's efforts to try and get him away from the scene. Six looks at what Grant was trying to plant in that safe and tells Max to get him away. It turns out that it was Vosberg's diary implicating Six, and Grant explains to us that this was a backup plan if the safe turned up empty. Later at a restaurant, Six tells Doyle to give up on one of their friends who's become expendable, bothering Doyle a little bit. Six gets a phone call asking Doyle to leave him for a bit, but Shannon shows up, which gives him something to do, as they chat about the upcoming ball. She leaves and Nicholas enters, saying he's the one who sent Vosberg's diary and wants $500,000 for his silence, or else he goes to the voting committee. Six says that Doyle will meet him in the morning with the money, and Doyle is surprised that Arthur would seriously consider a deal. Six tells him to think it through. He intends to pay the man, but in the form of shots to the heart. We see Nicholas putting on a bulletproof vest with blood capsules, and the Deep Throat-esque meeting goes as you would expect, with Max taking pictures of Nicholas getting shot, fortunately chasing Doyle away before he can finish the job with a shot to the head. Grant shows off his new computerized mask-making machine, based on a scan of Six's face. Meanwhile, Jim meets with Senator Oxenford, saying he has an important plan that he wants him to be a part of, but doesn't provide any details. Now, if only he could have done the same thing in the Lions episode. Yes, I'm still upset about that. He then meets Six again at the Lincoln Memorial, saying that he's convinced Oxenford to come to the Patriots Ball that evening. When Six returns to his office, the IMF see him shredding the information he received about Mr. Wendell, and they watch him wiping the hard drive of his computer, meaning that they have no further information about where his files are kept. It's time for the Patriots Ball, and the expected schmoozing takes place, and the IMF all arrive, with Grant taking the most difficult path by getting in from the roof above Six's office. Senator Oxenford arrives as Nicholas puts on his Arthur mask and prepares to head up as well. When Six goes to get ready for his broadcast, Grant gets into his office to have a look. Shannon arrives, and Jim tips Doyle off that she's part of Oxenford's staff, with both surprises and doesn't surprise him, and he drags her away to the office, forcing Grant to hide up near the skylight. Shannon tells Doyle that Six is setting him up to take the fall as part of the upcoming investigation, which Doyle, of course, scoffs at. Nicholas's Six comes to the office telling them to get out so that Grant can proceed with what he needs to do. Grant finds an interesting storage device in one of Six's drawers, figuring that must be where the files are kept. Shannon shows Doyle the pictures of him shooting Nicholas, saying they've been sent to the Senate committee, reminding him about what Six said earlier about friends being expendable. He confronts Nicholas's Six about it, who says it won't be a big deal if he pleads the fifth and gets a light sentence. Doyle is expectedly angry at this, but Nicholas uses a knockout ring to subdue him for a few minutes, removing his mask, and Max takes the bullets out of Doyle's gun. Seeing that the rest of the team are safe, Jim tells Six that he's learned the committee has found a new witness who has evidence about Doyle's activities and offered him immunity to testify against Six. Given the importance of the situation, Six forgoes his television appearance and heads up to his office, where he sees his files being erased by Grant, who has left the way he came and gone back to the control room. Max revives Doyle, who groggily sees a very much alive Nicholas talking to Jim, and realizes that Shannon's story must be true, heading up to the office to confront Six. Grant interrupts Six's expected transmission to show the country their argument in his office. The ball patrons, including the senator, watch and listen as the two confront each other about their various crimes, and Doyle pulls out his gun when Six threatens to reveal his sordid past as well, but of course the bullets are gone. Suddenly Six realizes that everything has gone quiet, and then everyone is watching the monitors. The senator arrives with police behind him, telling Six that he's out of business and headed to prison, and the IMF make their exit. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of A. I really like it for a lot of reasons. Starting with the callbacks, there are two episodes that I think this episode really calls back to from the original. One of them is the episode from season 6 called Blues, where the IMF engineer a public confession between two antagonists, putting them together, separating them and misleading them somewhat, and feeding them false information, making it look like the henchman is going to take the fall because he knows too much about what the main antagonist has done. So in that way, it's very, very similar. That's the one where you probably remember with, how you doing, Mr. Gorman, right? That was, that part of it at least was fun. But I think that the better callback is to the season 4 episode Mastermind, from which this borrows fairly heavily. In that one also, there's two guys, a main syndicate boss and his, heir apparent, so to speak. Not the heir apparent, but an heir apparent. Where the bad guys have a whackload of blackmail information that the IMF has to neutralize by taking it out of the safe. And that episode also relies on very, very impeccable timing. The IMF plan everything with great detail so that, the one guy sees what he needs to see in order to believe that the other has betrayed him. And then the boss sees things in a completely different way just because of the sequence of events and the way that the IMF has laid it out in a very, very, very effective separate and mislead plot. So those are the two episodes that this reminds me of the most. Other things that I really, really like about it, just the stuff that was, let's just call it the good stuff. This episode has a really old school feel to it. Right from almost for the very beginning, with Grant getting into the control room and messing with stuff, and we see, a whole panel with a whole bunch of wires and looking at schematics and things like that, just like old times. And also an IMF staple of intercepting the confirmation call to confirm somebody's identity when Jim claims that he's Darren Wendell. And so, Arthur gets Doyle to say, hey, check up on this guy. And then the IMF intercepts a call and they send their old info. Wow, that was really cool. I think part of that is because this episode was written by Walter Brau, who is a co-producer of the Revival series, And he actually wrote a couple of scripts for the original. He wrote Squeeze Play, if you remember that one, and he also wrote Casino. And he writes a couple of episodes later in the series as well. And that, I think, is a really big reason why this gets the old school feel. Honestly, when I was making notes here, when I was saying, Grant does this, I actually typed Barney and had to backspace it out because I guess just force of habit. Whenever I see those kinds of scenes, I put, okay, well, Barney goes in and does what he usually does, that sort of thing, right? So force of habit there. Kind of funny, but, speaks volumes, I think, is what I want to say here. And again, with the old school feel comes the fact that, yes, there's gadgetry. Yes, there's manipulation. There's the IMF techniques. But again, it's mostly about the story and the formulation of a sensible and a cogent plot. And I think that is really one of the best things about this episode. Also good, Richard Romanus is Arthur Six. He's a very, very unique kind of villain. He's not physically formidable. He's not like a mob boss. He's nothing like that. He's very, very different than the type of villain that the IMF usually goes after, but no less dangerous, and in many ways much more dangerous, much more insidiously dangerous. So him being a unique villain is definitely a plus here. And I think Richard Romanus is fantastic in this episode as Arthur Six. Another note I almost forgot to mention, Richard Romanus is yet again another guest star who was in the original series as well. He had a very minor role in the season 4 episode Gitano as the guard of a facility, but he was there. John Calvin as Doyle and as his sidekick. Also quite good. He starts to whimper a little bit towards the end because of what's going on, the stress of what's happening to him, but it does make sense under the circumstances. So I really liked the two of them as kind of a leader and sidekick team. They work really well together. Further to that, Arthur Six is a guy as this kind of unique villain who's too smart to be trapped by normal means. For a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but for some of the villains that we've seen so far and will continue to see, I've mentioned that, they almost seem overmatched. Like, does it really take an elite task force like the IMF to defeat these guys? But here, it does make sense. You cannot bully Arthur Six. You can't play him. He's a player. He knows how to detect it when somebody is trying to mess him up because that's what he does. He's in the business of messing people up. So it does make some sense for the IMF to go after him given the circumstances that we have. You have to make him feel like he's in control of the situation and then pull the rug out from under him. Yeah, there's a little bit of pennies from heaven in that, Jim presents himself as somebody who can give him something important that he wants. Yes, all of those kinds of techniques are there. But I do think that he is an effective villain, and I do think that the IMF's presence in the story does make sense. As a final note to that, this is a separate and mislead plot. And I've mentioned, especially in the original series, how many of those are disappointing or not effective because it happens too quickly or without a proper foundation laid for it. At the beginning of this episode, we're told that Doyle is fiercely loyal to Arthur Six. And we're told the reasons because Arthur helped him at a time where he was in really, really big trouble. And that's happened before. We've heard that kind of story in previous separate and mislead plots. But here, the way that the IMF sets it up, it really does make sense for these two guys to turn on each other the way that they do at the end. And that's not easy to pull off in a 1-hour drama episode. But Walter Brau and the other writers and producers managed to do it properly in this one, and I definitely give them props for that. And I don't want, last thing I want to say here in terms of the good, I don't want to belabor the point. I spoke about it quite a bit in the last review for The Fortune. But watch this episode and then tell me, that Jane Badler is not awesome. I dare you. She is completely awesome in this episode. She belongs on this show. She absolutely does. She is a successor to Barbara Bain as a femme fatale completely. Look at her in the credits. She was born for this. I love her so much on this show, and I'm so glad she's here. That shot with the smile over her shoulder makes me want to go inside and ask for a hall pass, if you know what I mean. A couple of things that I found a little bit weird. Not necessarily bad, but just a little weird. Jim has some one-liners in this episode. You know, they're watching Arthur Six, and at one point, Jim said, you know, Six makes a comment, and Jim says, "You better believe it." You know, and then later on, you know, when Six talks about, you know, you have to pay attention to detail. That's the key between professionals and amateurs. And after Six walks away, Jim says, "I couldn't agree more." That makes a little bit more sense, but it just seems a little bit superfluous and extraneous. It almost seems like there's a little something personal there, which really shouldn't be. We saw a little bit of that in the first episode, The Killer, although that was personal for Jim. So, again, I pointed out as just being a little bit weird. Also, the IMF looking at the knockout ring as though it wasn't a staple. It was a staple of the original series. There was one point in season 7 that, to me, I seem to recall the knockout ring being used in like 7 or 8 consecutive episodes. Like, they used it all the time. This is a little bit different in that it is actually like a real ring rather than something you'd kind of just put on your ring and use like this. You'd use this way. Maybe that's a little bit different. I don't know. But it's just weird for the IMF to talk about it as though it's something new for them, because it's not at all. We also do get the Jim one-liner at the end that, you know, well, the Arthur Six Almanac is canceled, or whatever he says. There's not a lot of wasted dialogue. It's a good script written by Walter Brow, and that is a good thing. So why do I give this an A rather than necessarily an A+? I gave an A+ to the episode The Pawn from a few episodes ago. Couple of reasons. One of them, which is not really a big reason, here we have 2 antagonists rather than just one, where we had in The Pawn. But more to the point, not that Arthur Six is not a quality antagonist, he really is, and I've already discussed that. I just give the edge to Rowena Wallace as Major Zorbaskaya in The Pawn. I just think that she was a better and more formidable villain. And that's why I give that episode the edge to this one. So I'm content to give this one an A and leave that one with an A+. And I think that that's about it for this one. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments about this and other episodes. Thank you again, and I will see you next time for the next review.